Hello everyone, my name is Ashley Flores and I am the Senior Director of Animal Behavior and Foster at Great Plains SPCA, and you are now watching the 12 different types of aggression. It may come as a surprise, but aggression is very normal. It is something that humans display, it is something that animals display. It is very common, and the biggest thing that I want you to get from this class or training is that aggression is normal, and just because a person or an animal displays aggressive behaviors, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are bad. So for example, if you get into a fight with your significant other because the laundry wasn't getting done, that doesn't mean that you're a bad person. The question is, if you keep having these aggressive behaviors, how do you deal and cope with them? And those are the things that, display your characteristics of, handling aggression. So, aggression, the definition is hostile or violent behavior or attitudes towards another, readiness to attack or confront. So, war is a form of aggression, fighting is aggression. The biggest thing is I just want you guys to understand that aggression is normal. If an animal is displaying aggression, that does not mean that they are a bad animal. It just means that they are frustrated or have some fear-based aggression or some other stuff that is causing them to display aggression. And we are going to talk about that. There are 12 major or main types of aggression, and we will be discussing those. There are some other ones because I know people are always asking that, and a lot of the other ones are kind of like subcategories, but there are 12 main types of aggression, and we will be going over those. The first type of aggression we're going to talk about is called medically based aggression, and it's just what it sounds like. It's when they have a medical issue that can cause them to display aggression. So the first thing is pain-induced aggression, which is probably one a lot of people are familiar with. I know that when I stub my toe when I'm walking in the dark, I get angry and sometimes I will shout out a curse word. So that feeling of getting angry when you get hurt is what we call pain-induced aggression. It's very common for animals at the shelter or animals in vet clinics, especially. When they go to a vet clinic, they will, especially if, like, say they've hurt or injured themselves in some way, and the vet is just trying to see, what their limits of mobility is, and they're moving their legs around, and then all of a sudden the dog gets hurt, or the movement causes pain, and then they get angry and they snap, or upset, and they will sometimes they even bite. So that's pain-induced aggression. It's usually pretty easily recognizable. They're in pain. Sometimes they'll do a whelp or a yelp beforehand, and then they will display the aggression. The next one is medication-induced aggression. This one is usually pretty easy to recognize as long as you understand the pattern there. So for example, if a dog starts taking medication, if they display aggression after they've been on the medication, then you take them off the medication and they do not display that aggression, then that is usually what we call medication induced aggression. So this is common for humans as well. So for example, people that have epilepsy, if someone has epilepsy and they take medications, they're medications that can kind of alter their behavior, and it can cause them to become more aggressive or less tolerant, or moody. So it's very similar, same thing with dogs and cats, and actually all animals will have this as well. The next one we're going to talk about is called seizure-induced aggression. Seizure-induced aggression is when they display aggression when they are in a seizure for whatever reason. So I'm going to kind of talk to you a little bit about this dog. His name is Bandit Lee Martin, and he had seizure-induced aggression. And if you notice I'm saying he in a past tense, that is because he was humanely euthanized, which I'll tell you about that in a second. So he came to our animal shelter. We adopted him out. He started having seizures. We have no idea why, and he was displaying aggression while he was having those seizures. It got to the point where his seizures, we were giving him medications and we were trying to control his seizures, and his seizures got more frequent over time, and they got to the point where he was having several seizures every day, and when he was displaying those seizures, he was hurting people or just displaying seizure-induced aggression. So unfortunately for this kiddo, he was humanely euthanized. So I just kind of wanted to talk about those behaviors. And that picture is not a great photo of him, but that's actually him on medication after he had a seizure, and that's why his face kind of looks like that. Maternal aggression is the next one we will be talking about. This is very common to see it in animal shelter. We see it frequently. And just so you know, the reason why I keep talking about shelters in this PowerPoint is because I work in an animal shelter. So that is where I see most of these aggressive behaviors. Anyways, so maternal aggression. There are different types of maternal aggression. They can cause or happen for different reasons. The first one is pseudo-pregnancy. And that is where the mother believes that they're pregnant. And that can happen for different reasons, but the biggest one is usually like they're undergoing a miscarriage and their body is still developing as if they're pregnant, which is common. So same thing with humans. When you have a first or second trimester miscarriage, your body still thinks it's pregnant. And so, because I mean, you were pregnant at one point, right? You just don't have a viable living thing in you anymore. So what happens is they still think they're pregnant, so the animals will start nesting, and they'll start doing all the things that they think, a pregnant animal can do. And even if they have a miscarriage or whatever, they can still may think they're pregnant, because dogs and cats don't understand losing babies like humans do. They do to an extent, but not the way we do. So this happens a lot where they'll start nesting and they'll get little toys and they'll start like holding the toys. And if you go near the toys, they'll display aggression because they're protecting their babies. So this does happen. And usually animals like this, we put into foster and we give them time. And all that takes is they just need time to understand what's going on. And then once they are understanding what is going on, they are ready to be adopted out, because they usually are. They usually get through it pretty quickly once they understand what's up. Another one is spay during pregnancy. There's lots of animals that get spayed during pregnancies at shelters all over the world for different reasons. One, because of pet population is very high and we don't have the space for all the dogs and cats coming in. And secondly, we may spay an animal and not even know they're pregnant. So if we spay an animal and they're pregnant and the dog knows that they're pregnant, they may still believe they're pregnant after the spay. So that can cause maternal aggression. But the biggest thing is maternal aggression is just protective aggression over their babies. So very common. It's the same thing with humans. We display aggression if we think someone's trying to hurt our babies as well. Predatory aggression is something very common. Predatory aggression involves such activities as stalking other animals for a kill, the violence that ensues when one animal infringes upon the marked territory of another, or posturing and attacks exhibited by nursing mothers when any animal, even the mate, approaches the nest. The entire predatory sequence involves searching, stalking, chasing, catching, biting, killing, and then eating. So very normal, because dogs and cats were hunters before we domesticated them. There are still a lot of cats that are not domesticated and still have to hunt if they are living out in the world by themselves. So the biggest thing to understand is that predatory aggression is that it is natural, and they do have natural instincts to do these behaviors. They are hunters, and that's why a lot of animals become frustrated or bored, is because they can't hunt, and so they like to hunt. And that's what play is for a lot of animals. So for example, if you have a dog and if you notice how your dog plays with their toys, when they grab the toy and they shake it, that's actually killing an animal. When they're taking out the stuffing, that's what we call gutting an animal. So they're practicing killing techniques because these are natural instincts. You can work on desensitization and counter conditioning with these. If it's more mild, you can definitely work on it. If it's more severe, it'll probably never go away. So for example, I had a dog that had some predatory aggression and couldn't live with small animals or cats. Well, then we got a cat because I knew that she could live with the cat with desensitization and counter conditioning. But it was like a 1 month process of, meeting and not meeting, and crate and rotate, and just, I spent an hour, 2 hours on desensitizing each other every single day for 30 days. It was incredibly hard and it took a lot of stamina, but I did it. And so then my dog could live with this cat, and they did successfully for years. But whenever she would go outside and see a squirrel run or a rabbit run or another cat, she knew that she couldn't, it was fair game. That wasn't our pack animal, right? She'd never hurt our cat that lived in the home, but she would go after other cats. So that is an instance where you can kind of work on the desensitization and counter conditioning training. But then there are some of the other animals that just display aggressive behaviors with smaller animals, and they want to eat them, or, there are also some breeds that display these characteristics more than others. So, for example, animals that are closer to the wolves or foxes. So, for example, one would be huskies and malamutes. They are usually raised in cold climate areas, and they chase small animals like rabbits, hares, and then they eat them. Now, that doesn't mean if you have a malamute, it's going to kill cats. Like, there's lots of huskies and malamutes out there that live with cats. They just have a genetic predisposition to have more predatory aggression than, say, a Lhasa Apso. Okay, so that's just the biggest thing that we can do. As far as can prey drive truly be trained out of an animal, I believe this answer is no, because it always needs maintenance or management training. So you're always going to have to stay on top of it and correct it and redirect it. And if you're not, then the animal will start displaying those behaviors again. And if they will display those behaviors without correction, redirection, or management all the time, then I would not consider that to be truly trained. Territorial aggression is the next one we'll be discussing. Territorial aggressive displays may range from growling, barking, lunging, chasing, snapping, and then even biting. Territorial displays may occur at windows, doors, behind fences, in cars, and they may quickly claim territory and show similar behaviors at picnic areas, park benches, and stuff like that. Most of the time, basically, it's just any area that they are accustomed to being in frequently. So, for example, a dog in a car. If you take your dog around to stores when you're driving around, and then the dog is in the car, you leave the dog alone, and then the dog becomes territorial of that space. It usually happens on owner's property. The house, car, lawn are usually the biggest places that you see it, that you see this behavior. Mail carriers reinforce this behavior a lot without even recognizing that they are doing it. So what will happen, our mail carriers will come up to the door, a dog will start growling and barking, then the mail carrier drops off the mail, and then they leave. And then the dog says, hey, I just scared the mail carrier off. The mail carrier comes day 2, the dog growls, barks, same things, and they repeat that behavior. Because if you remember, dogs are associative learners. They learn in patterns. So if they keep going through the pattern of scaring off the mail carrier, they believe that they have stopped the mail carrier from harming their home or whatever. So anytime people come over, knock on the door, and then leave, it reinforces territorial aggression. So I know one of the consults that I did, the mail carrier was really awesome, and they actually had a drop spot, one of those like old style drop the mail on the door thing. And so she would just throw a cookie in every time she dropped off the mail. And the owner just had some cookies next to the door, and she'd be like, hey, please throw in a cookie. So she'd throw in a cookie, or anyone else would throw in a cookie, and then they would then the dog got to the point where visitors were good and that good things, and strangers were happening, good things happen. So essentially that's what you do with territorial aggression. You incorporate play with animals or dogs in the territory slowly and safely to make them feel more comfortable and not feel like that it is threatened. But territorially aggressive animals usually have other types of aggression paired with that, and it's usually coined with fear aggression. So fear aggression, we're going to talk about that in a minute, but most of the times when you have an animal with territorial aggression, there are some other things going on. I will also share, for those that are at the shelter, territorial aggression can be kind of difficult to recognize in a shelter. Sometimes if they go and live in an office, then they'll display it in an office. But if they're living in the kennels, a lot of times that's kind of neutral territory. The play groups and play yards are neutral territory. So they may not display territorial aggression until they get adopted. Once they're adopted, they may display it in the home. So that happens a lot where people return animals because the animal has territorial aggression and we had no idea. Possession aggression is very common with animals. So resource guarding is another thing that they call it. And resource guarding is when an animal guards something they hold of high value, that resource. So that resource can be a person's attention. It can be toys. It can be food. It can be sticks. It can be a yard. It can literally be anything. So possession aggression comes out, as a behavior consultant, I get this one a lot where people want me to come out to the home and the animals will display possession aggression over humans. So what will happen is a chihuahua will be on someone's lap and someone comes near them and the chihuahua starts growling and barking at them. And possession aggression in that terms is actually not that hard to deal with. It's just people are not consistent and don't want to do it. So for example, if you have someone in your lap and they're displaying a possession aggression, the dog should lose whatever resource they're guarding immediately. So if you are sitting on the couch and your dog is on your lap and someone walks up and the dog growls or barks, then you should stand up immediately and walk away. Because then you're teaching the dog when they display that behavior, they lose that resource. So that's kind of how it is for all the resources, but you have to do them each differently, and to make sure that you're doing them safely, making sure no one gets hurt. So one is people. So food aggression is actually considered part of possession aggression, but food aggression is actually really easy to train. There's usually when we have an animal with food aggression at the animal shelter, we give the owner the option of doing management training or actually doing food aggression training. And management training is where you basically manage the situation. You give them food, you don't touch it, you don't let anyone else touch it. It's their food once you give it to them, and that's it. And then actual training, if you want to train them not to have food aggression, you basically do kind of like what we call trading up, but for higher value food. So for example, you give them an empty bowl and you set it on the ground and then there's no value to it, right? Then you grab a little treat or a piece of kibble and then you show them the kibble. They're smelling it and wanting it. Then you put your hand close to the food bowl. Then you drop the food into the bowl. Then you remove your hand. Then they eat that kibble out and it's one piece. They eat it, then the bowl is empty. So the bowl is again worthless. So then I get another treat and I continually do that to the point where what I'm doing is I'm making an association that when my hand comes near that bowl, the dog gets excited and they know that something good is going to happen. So once you've done this for quite a while and they feel comfortable with your hand coming near the bowl, then you're going to give them just a bowl with some boring kibble. And then you're going to do the same thing, but without kibble, you're going to do like a hot dog. So I'm going to have a hot dog. He's going to sniff the hot dog, and then I'm going to move the hot dog close to the kibble, and then I'm going to drop the hot dog into the kibble. He's going to eat the hot dog, maybe some of the kibble. I'm going to bring out another hot dog, and essentially all you're doing is you're just bringing up higher value items into that bowl to where they get excited when your hand goes near that bowl. So that's kind of ideally kind of the Cliff Notes version of how to train food aggression. It is difficult to train in a shelter just because there's so much inconsistency of volunteers and staff working with them. So a lot of times we just do maintenance, like you just don't take the food away from them, and then once they get their food, they get to eat it, and that's it. And then once they go into a home is when we talk about food aggression training. As far as some other resource guarding behaviors, maybe other animals, maybe they resource guard another animal, maybe they resource guard a child, maybe they resource guard food, toys, and essentially it's the same thing. You safely remove them from whatever they're guarding, and they don't get to guard that anymore. So then they learn, every time I display this behavior, I'm going to lose this resource. And that is how you start that process. So here is a video I'm going to share with you. So this is just an example of what food aggression looks like. And so here's a dog. Her name is Bella, and she's going to display some food aggression.
Hey, sit. Yes. You ready?
Okay, so as you can see, that is pretty severe food aggression. I'm going to play it one more time and kind of give you some commentary as you're watching it.
Okay, sit.
So the dog goes into a sit. I give him the food bowl. I give her the food bowl. If you notice, as soon as I put the hand down, she starts guarding it. She's huffing. She's clearly saying, this is mine, right? You don't grab food from a dog that looks like this, right? If you come back, you notice what I do? He leaves the food bowl to attack the food. So that is a sign of pretty severe food aggression, because in most times they just growl and bark or bite when the hand is near the food bowl. The animal usually doesn't step away or go forward to bite whatever a safer hand is or whatever. They don't walk away from the food, which she did. So that was severe food aggression. But she's doing awesome. She has no food aggression now. She's living in her home, and you can take food from her bowl. So that's just to kind of show you how severe it may look, and it may not be. Also, just, for those that don't know what a safer hand is, it is a fake plastic hand. We use that for our behavior evaluations for food testing because we do not want to get bitten. So fear aggression is the one that most people struggle with the most. Fear aggression is when an animal displays aggressive behaviors because they are fearful or because something is triggered that causes a flight or fight response, and it's usually fear triggered. So it is incredibly easy to reinforce fear aggressive behaviors, kind of like what I was talking about, the mail carrier early on. If I go and pet a dog and they growl at me, I'm going to pull my hand away and then walk away and not want to interact with them. So then the dog says, hey, every time I growl or bark or snap at somebody, they stay away from me. So they will continue that process, because remember, they're associative learners. They learn in patterns. So the key to a lot of this training, if you notice, is to break the pattern and to create a new pattern. So it is incredibly easy to reinforce. And it can be difficult because fear can be irrational. Having a good fear of fire, teaches us to not play with fire. But a lot of times with animals, fear can just be being alone or not being around someone or someone new coming nearby or something new happening. So if you've seen like people, riding their bike and their dogs are growling and barking at the bikes, it's because they were not socialized to bikes when they were younger. They don't know what they are. Same thing with hats. I don't know how many times I've seen someone come in with a big cowboy hat, and dogs are growling and barking at them because the hat is scary. Then they take the hat off and they do okay. So that's why it's so important for them to get overly socialized to so many things when they're younger before they hit that fear imprinting stage. But if they don't, and you get the dog in the later years and you've missed that fear imprinting stage, then the only way to work on these behaviors is through desensitization and counter conditioning. So I'm going to kind of tell you, it is definitely the most difficult form of aggression to rehabilitate. This is one of the biggest ones we struggle with in this shelter, and I will share that the number one reason for euthanasia is usually due to fear aggression. And what happens is they just can't overcome past trauma, or they can't cope with being scared of things, and so they do get humanely euthanized if they keep biting people. So what we tried at shelters, we tried doing medications, we tried desensitization counter conditioning, we tried slow introductions, we try all of these things. So I'm going to kind of share with you this dog right here. Her name is Zoe, and she was my personal dog. I got her when I was 18, and I got her from an animal shelter, and she had fear aggression, and I had to do a lot of management training. She's no longer with me. She died when she was about 16, and when she died, throughout her whole life, we had kind of a different process of how we introduced her. So we did slow introductions when she was younger. Then we got to the point where I was like, well, if someone's coming over for a little bit, I just don't introduce her to people. And now, which I didn't know then, is now we have something called the Muzzle Up Project, or the muzzle movement, if you've heard of it. And it's basically just telling people, to muzzle your animal when you do introductions, when you go on walks. And that muzzle movement is so awesome, because not only are you keeping your pet safe and other people safe, but you also relax when you're working with an animal that's muzzled, because then you're not worried about them biting people. And when you're relaxed, they become more relaxed, and they look to you for leadership instead of, if you're panicked, they're going to panic. So a lot of times when I see fear aggression, if I see a fear aggressive animal with someone that has a human with high stress or anxiety, a lot of times it's not a good match, because they've got to control their anxiety to help their pet. So we do different types of medication. So we use anti-anxiety medications. We use sedatives. We use different kinds of stuff. But the biggest one we use is called an SSRI. It's an anti-anxiety medication. It's an antidepressant, and what it does is it helps with anxiety for animals that have fear aggression. It also helps with animals that have isolation distress or separation anxiety. Now, something to note is if you have an animal with fear aggression, if they take medication and anti-anxiety medication, it can sometimes increase aggression. So you do have to watch that. So if you have an animal with severe bite history and you put them on this medication, it may increase their bite. If you have an animal without a bite history, we try putting them on anti-anxiety medications all the time if they don't have a bite history. So just keep that in mind. And so this dog, remember what I was talking about in the last slide about territorial aggression? Territorial aggression is usually paired with fear aggression. So this dog had territorial aggression and fear aggression. And what happens is because she has that fear aggression, she starts displaying territorial aggression to protect your area, to protect herself, to protect her family. And it is usually fear-based, fear-triggered. So the biggest thing that we kind of take a look at animals with fear aggression is if they have defensive behaviors or offensive behaviors. So defensive behaviors would be you walk into an office and the dog is growling and barking at you and starts hiding in the corner. And you're able to do what you need to, but the dog is growling and barking, but it's kind of like, it's almost like bluffing behavior. So they're growling and barking to bluff, to scare you away, but they're not trying to actively pursue you or anything like that. Offensive behaviors would look like you open the door, the dog starts growling and barking, then comes up and bites you. So dogs have choices, cats have choices, people have choices, right? So defensive, same thing with humans. Defensive behaviors would be like if someone's trying to fight with you, you're trying to cool them down, say, hey, we don't need to fight. Offensive would be you go back and you fight them, right? So it's the same thing with animals. If you have animals with defensive, aggressive behaviors, a lot of times it's much more easy to rehabilitate those animals. If you have animals that are going straight to the offense and biting, it is quite difficult to work with those animals. It doesn't mean you can't, because we do all the time, but it's definitely more difficult. So just kind of wanted to share that. Intra-dog aggression is the next one. It's more commonly known as dog aggression, especially at an animal shelter. We call it dog aggression, and it's when they display aggression towards other dogs. And so there is definitely a difference between dog aggression and dog reactivity. Dog aggression would be when they go to immediately fight. And usually animals with dog aggression, they cannot live with other animals or coexist. Animals with dog reactivity are usually, they're reactive when they see dogs. They growl and bark at dogs when they see them through like a fence or through a like some kind of barrier or on a leash. And then once they meet them, if they can have slow introductions and they can become friendly, then that's dog reactivity, and dog selectivity is what we call that. So a lot of times we'll say this dog is selective or this dog is dog aggressive, and that is very different. And just so you guys know, dog reactivity and dog selectivity is actually the norm for most dogs and cats as well. A lot of people always just, think like all dogs are friendly, but that's actually not the case. It's actually very much a bell curve. And animals are true dog aggression, and animals that, like all dogs, are on the left and right of the bell curve. And in the middle, the most common is animals with selectivity towards other animals. Just like with humans. Humans, there's people that like everybody, and then there's people that don't like very many people, and then there's people like me. I like people that are aligned with my political views or whatever, right? So people that are more like me, I'm going to get along with more. People that are not like me, I'm still going to get along. I'm still going to be friendly, but maybe I'm not aligned with the way that their belief system is, so I'm not going to be as close to them as I am someone else. So it's essentially kind of the same thing with dogs and cats. They like some animals more than others. They can get used to animals, but dog reactivity and dog selectivity is very common, very normal. Pack sibling aggression is where this happens a lot, where you get animals displaying aggressive behaviors because they're essentially, it can be like mob behavior. It can be dog pack, if you've heard a dog pit fight or whatever. And I'm not talking about pit bull fights. So when people hear pit, that's what they think of. But so for example, if you're at a dog park and you see a bunch of, like two dogs will get into it, and then you'll see a bunch of the other dogs. Some of the other dogs you have two types of dogs. You actually got three types of dogs. You get the dogs that stay completely away and get scared. You've got the more common thing, the dogs run up to the little fight and they kind of circle and they just kind of bark and make noise and they're kind of cheering on. And then you've got the less common dog that'll just go in there and start fighting with the other dogs. And before you know it, if one adds and then another adds and another adds, you can get a huge dog fight with multiple dogs. So that's what we call pack fighting. Dominance aggression. It's such a weird term to say, dominance aggression, because dominance is just situational. So for example, if I'm in a room and I'm sitting down and talking to a bunch of people and everyone's being quiet because they're listening to me, I am the dominant person in that situation. If you are talking and you have something important to say, I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to listen to you, and then you're the dominant one in that situation. So dominance aggression is kind of weird. So it can change, is theoretically what I'm trying to say. It changes frequently between animals and play groups. So you will see you'll see one animal kind of being kind of bossy, and then maybe they'll submit and let the other one be bossy. And sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have two dogs that just keep fighting, and they're kind of like fighting to be the top dog or whatever. So the biggest thing is it's situational. So for example, I had two dogs that came in. It was a mom and a daughter, and the mother dog was very bossy with the daughter dog and was just like just a total brat. She was very bossy, always told her what to do, always snapped at her, always just it wasn't a great relationship between them because she was just very bossy with them. And that's probably because the puppy was with her for way too long, was with her for a year or two. And sometimes that doesn't happen, but in this case it did happen. So anyway, so the mother was very bossy, very rude with the daughter. But then when we split them up and put them in different dynamics, the mother was actually quite submissive to everybody else. And then the daughter was quite bossy to everyone else because that's what she learned. So dominance is situational, is what I'm trying to explain out of that. The next one is play aggression. And play aggression is when they're just playing really rough and really hard, and then that play escalates, and it can turn into a fight, which is pretty common. It's the same thing with humans. I don't know if you've For me, I had a brother growing up. We would wrestle, and then he would hit me too hard, and I'd get angry. Then I'd hit him harder. Then he'd get angry. Then he'd hit me hard, and then I'd pinch him. And before you know it, we were in a serious fight. Same thing with animals. That happens as well. So barrier aggression. Barrier aggression is one people see a lot and they get scared of when they see it. So here are some different pictures of barrier aggression. Barrier aggression is when an animal displays aggressive behaviors due to some type of barrier. And a lot of people think barrier is only fences. It's not. It's also leashes, which is why I have the two pictures of the dogs on leash. So what happens is they're displaying aggression because they're frustrated for different reasons. They could be frustrated because they're dog reactive. They could be dog aggressive. They could have fear aggression and be fearful. They could also just get angry because there's a fence in the way and they just want to go play with another dog. And that actually happens at our shelter a lot, where dogs will start growling and barking because they actually are growling and barking at the door because they are frustrated that there's a barrier in the way. And then once you move that barrier, the dog is totally friendly and wanting to play. So there are different types of barrier aggression. And the reason why, so a lot of people don't think about leashes as being a barrier, but it is a barrier in the sense that they are not free. So what happens is if they're on a tight leash and they feel like they can't go, if they're walking and they're on a leash and another dog comes up and say they're fearful, say they're afraid of this other dog and they don't know what to do. They're on a leash, so they cannot leave. So they either have to go through fight or flight, right? And a lot of times if you can't fight, you're taking that choice away, so then they go straight to fight. It's the same thing why a lot of animals that live on tethers or chains have a lot of barrier aggression, because they have to fight for that area because they can't leave that area, if that makes sense. So barrier aggression is very common in shelters. We reinforce it all the time. So example, I walk by a kennel, a dog is barking, and say I'm not able to give them any engagement at that time, and I'm walking to go to a meeting. When I walk by to the meeting, the dog barks, I keep walking, then the dog just got reinforced to have barrier aggression. So barrier aggression is very, very common, and it's very, very frustrating. It is definitely trainable with desensitization and counter conditioning. And the biggest way that we work on that is basically what we call threshold work. So where if, say, a dog is 20 feet away from another dog and they're barking, but they're able to listen, then that's kind of like where we train. Also, if they're 30 feet away, they're usually ignoring the dog. At 20 feet, they look at the dog, and then at, say, 10 feet, they start growling and barking. So essentially, between points A and B, which would be 30 feet and 20 feet, is where you're going to keep practicing and working on sit, stay, watch, look, and basically trying to keep the dog's attention while the dog is growling or not growling or barking. Once you get to the point where they're past threshold, where the dog is growling and barking at the other animal, you've lost them. You've got to start all over. I see this happen all the time where people will put their dog in a set and they'll just sit there and the dog will just lose it. Because what happens is when they get past the threshold, they've got cortisol going through their brain. It's a stress hormone. And it goes, and they have adrenaline, and all of this stuff is peaked, so they can't calm down. So it's the same thing when a human gets into a fight. If you've ever gotten into a fight with your significant other or a parent or a sibling, and you're screaming and yelling at them, and then all of a sudden I come in and I say, okay, don't be mad anymore. Like, that's not how it works. Like, it takes a while for your brain chemistry to say, you've got to split up for a second. You've got to take some time out. It takes time to calm down. And then you can try to reintegrate, right? Or same thing, or, talk to the person again. So very, very common. In fact, if an animal doesn't when they hit threshold, if they don't have a recovery and they become friendly immediately, then they may have actual idiopathic aggression, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So it's actually very normal for them to be angry and to stay angry. So at that point, you just separate them, you calm them down, and then you rework on training later. But trying to work on training when they've hit threshold is not going to be effective, and it's just going to cause more frustration. So frustration elicited aggression is probably a common type of aggression we see in the animal welfare and sheltering world. And the reason why is because a lot of times they're not getting the mental stimulation and physical exercise that they need. So what happens is, so mental stimulation is just as important as exercise. And a lot of times people, what they do is they think that they just give them more and more exercise. But when you give them more and more exercise, all you're doing is increasing their stamina, which that doesn't mean not to exercise. And you should absolutely be exercising because that decreases stress and anxiety. But you should also be giving them mental stimulation. So mental stimulation is giving them something that can make their brain work. So like enrichment boxes or puzzle feeders. So if you think about it, when you go for a run, you feel energized, you feel good, you feel ready to go. When you are mentally stimulated, so if you're at work on a computer for 8 hours, you are drained. You come home and you're like, I can't do anything, I'm drained. That mental stimulation, that is what mental stimulation is. It's when you're using your brain, and that's what's causing you to become tired. So you need exercise and mental stimulation. If you don't get those, you get frustration elicited aggression. And that's for humans, that's for dogs, that's for cats, that's for all mammals, and for other species as well. So barrier aggression, how do we handle that? In shelters, we make what we call enrichment boxes. We do puzzle feeders. We do exercise. We do play groups. So for example, this dog right here, his name is Major Cuddles. He was so frustrated in the kennel that he would growl and bark, and every time we'd open the door, he would body slam us, and it would be hard trying to get the leash on because he'd be biting the leash because he had so much extra energy and didn't know how to handle this energy. And enrichment boxes saved his life. I know that sounds crazy, but yes, enrichment boxes saved his life. So we made these elaborate boxes with peanut butter and treats and puzzles and stuff. And he used this as mental stimulation, and this is what caused him to calm down and get adopted. And once he was adopted, living a wonderful life. And he does great in his home. He gets enrichments, he gets exercise, and he gets, it's quiet. He doesn't have to live in a place where dogs are barking incessantly. So this just is a much better situation for him. So why I'm sharing this is that frustration elicited aggression is environmental, and it creates anxiety, and you just have to learn how to work with that. So frustration elicited is one where you're constantly battling, but if you can offer enough exercise and mental stimulation, that is absolutely key. Okay, so we're going to talk about redirected aggression, and this is one that's not very fun. And I don't use any of our bite photos in these for privacy reasons. So this is a stock photo I found online. But a redirected aggression happens frequently when humans break up fights between animals because they are not trained to do them properly. Here at the shelter, we are trained to break up fights, so we rarely get bit. But a lot of times in the public, they don't know what to do, and so they just start using their hands and body to break up fights. So a redirected aggression is when an animal is displaying aggression and then they redirect on whatever's nearby, such as a human's arm or another dog or a cat or a sofa or whatever. So what's happening is they are extremely frustrated. They're growling, they're over threshold, and then they redirect on something to release the aggression. This happens frequently with animals displaying frustration, illicit aggression, which is why that mental stimulation and exercise is so important. So redirected aggression happens a lot with barriers as well. So one dog will be growling and barking. So for example, we have this where we have two dogs in a kennel in a play group and they're playing together. Then another dog walks by the fence and they start growling and barking at the animal on the other side of the fence, and then they'll redirect and fight with the dog next to them. Humans do this all the time. When we get into fights and then we start fighting about something else, that is called redirected aggression. So for example, if I'm doing the dishes and I'm angry at something that happens at work, and then your significant other comes over and then you start yelling at them for not doing the laundry, that's kind of redirected aggression. So yelling at each other is not the same as biting somebody, as you can see, but sometimes in some situations people are violent in these situations. So that is what redirected aggression is. Dogs use their teeth to communicate, so that's why biting is one of the things that they go to. It's not appropriate behavior. We don't like it, but it's a learned behavior to them. Okay, so we're going to talk about idiopathic aggression. Uh, Idiopathic aggression is essentially it's kind of a catch-all phrase for any type of aggression that someone doesn't understand, which means it gets overly diagnosed frequently. So if you have a dog and they are displaying aggression and you don't know what it is, trainers or vets, they'll just say it's idiopathic aggression. So in my opinion, it's not common. I feel like most of the time I can identify what aggression is and what types of aggression they are. So when I see idiopathic aggression, it's usually neurological issues or something like that, which could be paired with medically based aggression. But idiopathic aggression is something that is commonly used, and it just means that they don't know what it is by definition, but it's unexplained behaviors, things that we may not understand. So, for example, this dog right here, he is a lab pit mix, and he had no issues for several weeks, and then all of a sudden he started displaying these very peculiar behaviors. And I'm going to share this video with you, but what's peculiar about it is that the aggression is not directed towards any person or thing. The aggression is at everything around him. So I'll just go ahead and play, and I'll talk about it in a second. So you see the kind of the teeth chattering and the eyes, and he is looking at the camera person here, but as you can see, they're looking in different directions, because a lot of times when they're displaying animals aggression towards a human, they keep looking at that human, right? So we were taking a video because he was doing this nonstop around his kennel for no reason at all. And he has his hackles, which is called piloerection. He's got his teeth in full frontal mode, which makes him look very vicious, which is a behavior that they do to look scary towards other people or to other animals, but just very peculiar behavior. He was doing this towards the walls. He was doing this towards his bed, his bowls. I mean, there was just something wrong with this dog. We could not figure it out. So unfortunately, he was humanely euthanized, because you can't adopt out a dog that is doing this behavior. So very sad, but I did kind of just want to explain what idiopathic aggression was. And those were the 12 main types of aggression. So I know that I didn't answer the question real quick about the idiopathic aggression, about it being rehabilitatable. It depends on if you can find the trigger or not. If you can't find the trigger, it's usually not rehabilitatable. If you can find the trigger, then you can usually, you can work on it. Like I've said a million times, dogs are associative learners. You create patterns, you create new patterns, and it is very effective. If you have any questions at all, you can definitely email me. My email address is aflores@greatplainspca.org. And I did want to just note that many of the animals' names have been changed in this presentation due to privacy reasons. Most of the photos and videos are from Great Plains SPCA, but some of them were stock photos just used from a simple Google search. So I did want to share that. So they are not all of our photos. But anyways, if you have any questions, please email me, and thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it. And and if you have any feedback, definitely you can email me and let me know, because I'm always happy to hear feedback. Hope you have a great day.